and gentlemen, I thank you for your most interesting contributions to literature, to poetry, to humanity and progress, which I have had the privilege of absorbing here tonight. You have asked me most kindly to join your ranks and give me 10 minutes to demonstrate with utmost economy some scientific facts about the nature of perception. So let me begin not by speaking, producing sound waves, beautiful sound waves, as we have just heard, to make your eardrums vibrate and tremble, but by performing a modern scientific experiment. To show you how the human body is capable of producing pressure. In this balloon, we have approximately atmospheric pressure. The atmosphere in this room is pressing from outside. The pressure inside is pressing out against the atmosphere. The balloon keeps its shape. You see, when I increase the pressure, the balloon increases in volume. So this is now the volume which, for example, Goethe would have used when he filled his lungs with air and recited beautiful poetry. And if I increase the volume further, more pressure, more volume. So now, for example, I have reached the volume which Professor Kant in Königshof used to lecture on the categorical imperative to keep his students awake. And if I inflate it even more, this is now the volume which maybe Napoleon used to command his troops in Waterloo. And we are now approximately 0.6, 0.88 bar. And you can imagine, if I increase the pressure inside and if I increase the volume even more, I will start now to displace your bodies. Your bodies will be displaced against the walls, yes? And if I increase it now maybe to 1.2 bar, there will be something like an explosion, and you all will just be little small pieces flying in empty space, shot away, for example, by the Austrian artillery. It is, of course, not a very pleasant experience to be facing frontally in this situation an explosion. So we can do an alternative procedure, which is to store the pressure inside here. Pressure from here is now inside, and indeed if I tie a knot like this, the situation is now safe again. And safe again, ladies and gentlemen, and what I can do using my magic projector lantern, which I have here, I can demonstrate what it would be like if I would project you with an explosion with strong pressure into the atmosphere. this in the atmosphere, traveling faster than the speed of sound, at Mach 1.6 or 1.8. I always remember how I was as a child when I visited in summer my grandfather, who had a farm in Breslau. And on this farm he had a chicken. And to impress his immensely curious 4-year-old grandson, he liked to show a magic chicken trick. And this magic chicken trick, it goes like this. My grandfather would catch a chicken. And he would press it firmly to the ground. And after half a minute or so, when the chicken realized it was not escaping and accepted its sad fate under my grandfather's arms, he would take out a piece of chalk, magic chalk, from his bag. And with this magic chalk, he drew a line along the chicken's spine. And then he used the magic chalk to draw a circle on the ground around the chicken. And then we stepped back. We stepped back, and the chicken remained motionless on the ground in the circle like this. Scare the chicken, said my grandfather. Come on, scare the chicken. And I was, of course, a highly gifted 4-year-old, and I had many ideas how to scare a chicken, so he didn't have to tell me twice. I had always some wet gunpowder in my pockets, and I put the wet gunpowder on the chicken's beak and on its head, and I set it to fire, and the chicken was exposed to thick toxic smoke, but it just did not react. It stayed motionless like this. So I got my magnesium strobe light, which later, as an adult scientist, I would use to take pictures or photographs of bullets flying at ultrasonic speeds. And I put the strobe light in front of the chicken, and I sent strong light flashes directly into its eye. But the chicken, it did not react. It didn't even blink. It did not squawk. It was just like this. And I got so angry at my grandfather with the chicken that I hit the chicken, or started hitting it with stones, which I calculated exactly how they would hit the chicken. And then I started hitting its head with a spade and its back with a spade, and I hit it so strongly that the chicken was paralyzed, but it still did not move. Ha 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 ha, said my grandfather. Ha 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 ha, it's magic. The chicken thinks it is tied up with a rope, and only with my magic chalk can I break the spell. And indeed, I was never allowed to watch how he did it. But when I looked again, indeed, yes, the chicken proved again the chicken was as free as you or me. And it was only many years later, when I was already a famous scientist, that I remembered my grandfather's wondrous poultry magic and finally decided to investigate it with a modern scientific experiment. I asked for a chicken to be brought into my laboratory in Budapest. I had no magic chalk, of course, so I tried a new alternative method to paralyze the chicken. I put it inside a glass vacuum chamber for a few minutes, and then I put it inside my new 3D printer, and the chicken was sprayed and coated with burning hot plastic on its feathers and its head, and it was like shocked and it did not move. And so I could prove that it is possible to paralyze a chicken without magic chalk. And in fact, it can simply be explained by a sort of trance-induced hypnosis. Yet, even here, in the 21st century, in Berlin, there are still people who will believe any such magic story without using to test science to test if it is actually true. They laugh at science. And instead, yeah, we have seen it, they worship poetry, painting, performance, music, fashion, and the daily printed news, as if it has some kind of higher power. There are even more primitive people amongst us, maybe even here in this room, who believe they can use their thoughts and willpower to control reality, to prevent, for example, cancer with positive thoughts, or to achieve professional success if you just think something positive. Even though, of course, it is exactly the opposite way. Reality impresses itself on the mind and controls our thoughts. I have indeed observed fully grown German adults shouting at a television screen in a football game. They were like savages in the jungle, with bloodshot eyes and painted faces, because they want to propel the football into the enemy's goal. Just by shouting and moving even more forward. And if the ball goes in the other direction, they think it's because they haven't shouted loud enough. A paralyzed chicken and a magic piece of chalk. A positive thought and professional success. A football ball and loud shouting. There is nothing wrong with these random associations. But when the human mind puts one and one together, these mental connections are made and they can spread through the population like a wildfire. Then, one individual's error of perception can quickly be confused with common sense, with a bigger conspiracy, with higher knowledge or God's will. Let us remember that it was only 7 or 8 generations ago, in 1782, that the last so-called witch was burnt in Europe, in Glarus, Switzerland. Since then, countless other sacrifices, human sacrifices, and monstrous crimes have been committed because people have trusted their emotions and their gut feelings and have ignored the voice of reason and modern science. And do I need to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, of the situation today in Europe? We have, on one hand, economic, social instability. On the other hand, we have hundreds of thousands of so-called refugees who are coming from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. These two facts are distinctly and clearly observable. Yet, once again, they become automatically connected in the primitive human mind, first inspiring some of us to unconditional acts of sympathy, solidarity, and limitless self-sacrifice, and then, just a few months later, driving others into blind fear, hate, and political madness. I am no doctor, so I have no cure for this disease of the human mind. I am also not a shaman or a sorcerer or some kind of performance artist who, with a little bit of good magic, can somehow displace the black magic of our times. What I am, ladies and gentlemen, with all my heart and my so-called soul, is a scientist. And therefore, I will now happily leave this stage to you again, dear poets, writers and artists of Berlin, and head back to my laboratory in Budapest, where I have far more serious matters awaiting me, and also a paralyzed chicken, which is still waiting here. When I was finally old enough, my grandfather, he told me the trick how to free this chicken from its spell. And even today, in such troubled times as we are living, when I see anyone who is scared or who is paralyzed or who is simply chickening out, I know that it is my duty as a scientist to do exactly what my grandfather Ernst would have done, which is this. Thank you.